wars of religion that came after. And we're still, this will have, the 30 Years' War will have a big effect on the U.S. What's going to become the U.S.? The English Civil War, which will also be religious, will have immense impact on the United States.
So is it just me, or do we kind of see wars getting shorter as time moves on?
Yes and no. But you know, like the Dutch War, like when the Spanish tried to control the Netherlands, that was a 90-year war.
Okay.
So part of the thing is, you know, these armies had to be really small. And so the campaigns had to be pretty limited because it was almost impossible to supply. We'll talk about that in the 30 Years' War. You know, how do you supply 30,000 men with no roads, right? You know, you don't have waterways. So let's go ahead then and.
So with that Dutch war, so I guess I didn't know at the beginning that, so the Spanish owned like the Netherlands area, right?
Yeah.
And so they basically fought for independence?
Yeah, they fought against independence against the Spanish.
Okay.
And they were mostly Calvinists.
And they became the United Provinces.
Yeah, United Provinces. Technically, they're still that today, but then it soon become the Netherlands. But I did talk about how, since William of Orange was their first real leader,
everything is orange.
Yeah. I'm just going to do one thing on my little. Okay, so we got to. Did we get the St. Bartholomew Day's Massacre?
Yes.
So let's go and do that. So the St. Bartholomew Day's Massacre, and that one we did the Spanish Armada yesterday, and the fire ships, and it's just such a great story about the Spanish Armada. Yeah.
So what were the fire ships?
Okay, they're also called hell burners. But what they did is, the British actually just burnt the ships, just set ships on fire, old ships, and drifted them into the Spanish fleet at Calais. So Calais, and if you look at this map, you see how close it is. You know, the thought was we pick up these 30,000 troops who turned out to not be there.
Where were they?
A little bit right about here.
Okay.
Not far away. They were still in Flanders, which was then called Spanish Netherlands. But the problem was, you know, there's no roads, it's impossible to move. And when the Duke of Alba, Parma, same thing, got the word, it's almost impossible to get all that supply ready. And you think, oh, we just had to be there for a certain time. How do you coordinate in 1588? You can't get on the phone and say, are you ready to go? And so any elaborate plans almost always broke down. Heck, elaborate plans always break down today. Just imagine how hard it was before communications. And who was the privateer? The pirate for hire. Who attacked it is?
Drake.
Yeah, that's Sir Francis Drake. And Plymouth is right there. That's, you'll see the Ark Royal. We'll talk about that. And the Victory. And the fire ships, though, what they did, the British set these ships on fire and let them drift into the Spanish ships. And since, you know, if one of those fire ships hits a ship, you know, there's nothing they can do. And especially with that, on deck, we're going to have tar all over and buckets of tar. Just go. But the Dutch, and that's where the actual term hellburners came from, they actually would pack up 4 barrels of gunpowder.
Oh, nice.
And so it might explode. Not a huge explosion, but enough barrels of gunpowder. And so the Spanish just panicked. And that's how come Grapevines right here, they're able to defeat them. And then they drifted all the way around. And this will make Britain, or the beginnings of England, and then we're not quite to Britain yet. These are the British Isles, but we'll unify with Scotland after Elizabeth died. So we're good when we talk about the English Civil War. That's when we get to James I. Yes.
What's like Wales taking over?
Poor Wales had been taken over by the British at first when William the Conqueror came, and then they would be totally subdued a couple different times in rebellions, and like William Longshanks, which was one of the kings.
Okay.
And that's why Wales, they put all these castles in them. There's amazing castles in Wales because the British use them as fortifications to control Wales.
I was just wondering because we keep saying like Scotland is like the big thing in staying Catholic, and then Wales is just.
Scotland had won their independence. They were taken over for a while, then they won their independence. Earl the Bruce, who would be nicknamed Britain.
What?
We nicknamed Britain. Nothing to do with the Mel Gibson movie.
What's up with the ants?
I know, we got ants. Ants came into the window. The windows don't seal, and now once they're in, when it got cold, we want to throw a bunch of them in. We can take it home.
I mean, I'll just let them come in.
I don't like ants. And they controlled it for a while, but when they got really cold, they got driven out, or it must have been like hanging out with the well. Soon we'll be covered. Ants are, they go in there. You can't stop ants.
It's like birds.
Huh?
Like birds.
No, birds are just birds. We agree, birds are better. I'm a partridge. Don't mess with birds.
Birds go wherever they want.
Yeah, and they don't wear masks.
Yeah.
If you ever want to see the best castle in the world, go to Wales. Even though the Welsh have a very negative attitude towards it. Yeah.
What's Ireland doing for all this?
Ireland was half independent, half not. And we'll have to come back to Ireland when we get to Cromwell. But there were the British had taken areas around Dublin, but the rest of it was controlled by Irish Catholics. And so there's technically a king of Ireland, but England is going to completely subdue them in the 17th century. We'll have to come back to that because what Britain's going to do during what's called the Commonwealth was one of the great crimes against humanity. And Britain was involved, which seems to be almost always going to happen for the next 300 years. Crimes against humanity, where's Britain? Okay, so with that, we got the St. Bartholomew Days Massacre, and that's when the Huguenots would be slaughtered. Henry of Navarre, he converted to Catholicism, and that's when they're all the little, the kings. Oh, what happened to Henry II? He was a relatively strong king, going to marry his daughter to King Philip II, and what happened to him?
He died jousting.
Yeah, jousted, took the joust right in his eye, and died of an infection. But I'm still trying to figure out how. Well, of course, I get a eyelash in my eye. I can't function, so I can't even imagine how bad that is. And
Aren't they long too, the end pieces?
for the lance,
Yeah.
well, the lance is going to be about 14 foot long.
Well, yeah, there's like a metal piece at the end.
Metal piece. Now they would stick like a ball on it, so it would would they jousted?
Oh, okay.
But
I thought there was
the
also
ball
some of the
came
metal
off.
pieces.
And then it stuck into the little slit in his helmet. So it didn't penetrate, okay, anything in your eye is a long penetration, but the one, it basically took the eye out, but then infected. I can't even imagine the agony. And then we had 3 of his sons take part. And so this is when, let's go back just to review this really quick. I remember, so the Huguenots, and that's where we get Francis. I want to show this. That's Francis, and that's Charles. You can tell they're brothers, right?
Wait, why did it look like? Can you go back to the last one? Is this just me? Whereas the guy on the left had the beard, sort of.
That's how they try to make him look older.
Okay, that's still weird.
And somebody else pointed this out, so now I'll point it out. Look how freakishly big his hands are. He could palm a pumpkin at the age of 10. And so this would lead to more religious war. And actually the Catholics dominated the Huguenots, drove them to the fortifications, a horrific fight. But this is going to eventually lead to what's called the War of the Three Henries. I can't make up the War of the Three Henries. Because it's going to be basically the Catholic League versus the Protestant League. I'm just making sure I'm recording this. Everything good? Okay. So we have the Catholics versus the Protestants, but the Protestants are the Huguenots. And this area in red, these are the areas of the Huguenots. And during the fight, by the way, Henry of Navarre converted to Catholicism, converted back to Calvinism. So that's get my number of conversions right, that's his 4th conversion. it's very fluid. So what happened was this. Henry III was king, or did I skip somebody? I skipped somebody, didn't I? Oh, no, I know I did. So these are the three Henrys. Henry III, who will be king, Henry of Guise, Henry of Navarre, we mentioned before, and Henry of Guise, who is the Catholic leader. So those are the three Henrys. Who, pray tell, is Henry III? I knew I just moved the order of the slides. So these are the three Henrys. Henry III was Charles's brother. So let's get to what happened to him. Father, here's Paris. These are the areas where most of the fighting. And let's be clear about when armies fought at this time, when they went through an area, they lived off the land, they stripped food from everywhere, and they looted, pillaged, and raped. They left nothing but ruin. What kind of bigwigs walk around the school today? They're interviewing, they have two superintendent candidates for the next superintendent. So you have school board members and people going through the school today. We feel pretty cool, don't we? So Henry III would become the new king right after the St. Bartholomew Days massacre. Charles IX died of consumption. Remember, consumption is tuberculosis. Now Henry was only 23 years old. So very young man. And in a weird quirk of fate, the next year, the nobles in Poland elected him king, and he'd be king of Poland for 2 years. And that was an absolute disaster. He rode into Warsaw, they hated him, they sent him out, and eventually Poland would do kind of a monarchy, or they would do just a group of nobility, which turned out to be a disaster for him. And there's Henry III right there. Now Henry III's big issue was he was not going to have an heir. They needed an heir. He did have a younger brother. He did have a younger brother. The last of Henry II's brother, or Henry II's sons, but his younger brother died and he was without an heir. Why wasn't he have an heir? Because he was openly homosexual and didn't have a wife, wasn't married. And he would routinely show up to court dressed as a woman. And people think about this today and think, boy, back then they must have absolutely just been repulsed by this because of the, very, what we say in modern terms, homophobic attitude. Actually wasn't that big of a deal. It was just kind of odd, people thought. You would see much more feeling and prejudice against homosexuals more in like the 19th century, and going into the 20th century. That's when it really just exploded. But not here. So if you're thinking, well, it must have been, it was like, oh yeah, whatever. But he's not going to have an heir. And so he needs an heir. And he's a son of Henry II, so you know he's going to die young. So what happens? This is how we get the War of the Three Henrys. Henry III made Henry of Navarre heir because they were cousins. Henry of Navarre was the leader of the Calvinists. And even though technically he said, well, I did convert to Catholicism once, the Catholics went absolutely nuts. And Henry of Guise was furious. Absolutely furious. Oops, we got stuff out of order here. Henry Guise was furious. Don't worry about Henry III being assassinated. After the Spanish Armada was defeated, Henry III realized, okay, the Catholics don't have much power. I got to get rid of those Catholics. And so he turned on Henry of Guise. He turned on him and assassinated Henry of Guise. Henry of Guise was the leading Catholic. When Guise was assassinated, Henry III realized, I'm next. And he tried to run and join Henry of Navarre. So basically the whole thing just turned upside down. But in the process, here's Guise being assassinated, and devout Catholics kill Henry III. And so who's left? Henry of Navarre. And so yes, there's more fighting and fighting with Huguenots, Catholics, but that's how it all ended. Somebody got out of order here. And so the fighting continued, but Henry of Navarre, he would defeat the Catholic League. There'd be two big battles. He was an able leader. The Huguenots had the advantage of British help, and Spain was kind of neutralized. And in it, he rode into Paris and said, I deserve and claim to be the king. So he went from Henry of Navarre, Henry I of Navarre, to Henry IV of France. But to appease the Catholics, he converted. And his famous saying, Paris, where the capital is, Tours, I mispronounced that, Paris is worth a mass. And this is something I mentioned before with Queen Elizabeth, politique, that the affairs of the state sometimes are more important than the affairs of religion. Henry IV realized that to keep France together, he must become a Catholic, and whatever. He says he's a Catholic, he still practiced Catholicism. He just said it, he would show up to Mass when it was required. But it was more important to keep the state together. The state was more important than religion. And so we saw Elizabeth already kind of doing this, and we saw Henry of Navarre do this. And his son will do the same thing, Louis XIII. We're not to Louis yet. And by the way, this is a very stylistic painting of Henry of Navarre riding into Paris, painting done by Rubens, one of the Baroque artists, Rubens. So, Navarre, Henry IV will soon become Henry the Good or Henry the Great, and be considered one of the great monarchs in French history. And there's Henry IV. He got the Spanish out of it. Spanish influence would be totally neutralized. Spain had a lot of influence because of the constant civil war. Now, Spain is out. And France, okay, what does that mean? They go back to fighting Spain pretty soon. Because they're France. France fights everybody. Actually, they're usually very good soldiers.
Yeah, not now.
Now, when's the last time they fought?
Or, I mean, not then.
Oh, then, yeah. And then, in 1898, in one of the most intelligent moves he could make, he would sign the Edict of Nantes. The Edict of Nantes would basically do this. Huguenots would be allowed. So they could practice their faith, they could have cities, they could have universities, but this was not a blanket freedom of religion. So they did not allow, for example, the Anabaptists, Lutherans were not welcome, or other sects that were just beginning to develop. Millennians who believed that the world was going to end very soon. They did not allow them in. So they're not. But temporary religious freedom. It would be his grandson who would overturn this. Great-grandson, Louis XIV, the son king. But it's still divided. And now, it's no longer the Valais family. It's the Bourbons. And this would be the Bourbon monarchs. We have Henry, Louis XIII, Louis XIV, Louis XV, Louis XVI.
Man, they're imaginative, aren't they?
Huh? Yeah, very. Okay, Louis XVII, that was during the Revolution, so he would die. Then we'd have Louis XVIII. Huh? There's a lot of Louis all over. But King Louis XVIII was the last one. There'd be a, when Napoleon III, Napoleon's nephew made himself emperor, he called himself Louis Napoleon. And so that's, but then in 1610, Henry IV was assassinated. Okay, you don't need to know his name, just Francois Rabelais. I forgot his name, so I thought I want to type it in so I don't forget it again. But he was the best way to describe him was a Catholic fanatic who never believed he converted, which is basically true, despite the edicts of Nantes. And you can see it right here. Here's Louis XIV, and you can see the knife right there. He came up and stabbed him to death, and he died the next day. So he's mad about Nantes, the Edict of Nantes. And so 9-year-old Louis XIII, and he would be on the throne for 50 years. Over 50 years. Louis XIII. We're not done with Louis. We will come back to him.
He kept going.
Louis was around for a long time. Then we get Louis the 14th, who will go on even longer. The infamous Sun King. But we're going to come back to Louis the 13th because we got to get to a guy named Richelieu, the 30 Years' War. Speaking of 30 Years' War, let's do another war. So the religious conflicts seemingly died down, but don't forget, there's still technically fighting here. Clearly because of this. It's an uneasy peace here. Spain is not as strong as they used to be, but they still see it as their duty to drive out Protestants. And at this time, Spain was still massive. That here, which is now Belgium, then it was Spanish Netherlands, they would give it to the Austrians. So here it's called Austrian Netherlands. So, but that's the Spain. And this area right here was Spanish. Portugal had been taken by the Spanish, and they still had New Spain. So Spain still saw themselves as this country that must defeat the pagans. And the empire had a Habsburg Austrian in charge, and they are Catholic. And so, yes, they pushed the war back, or they pushed the fighting back, but it is there kind of broiling behind the scenes. And when it would explode, it exploded in a place that had religious conflict going back to the Hussites. So here we have the 30 Years' War. And this one actually was 30 years. Make you feel better? Even though technically the French and the Spanish would fight for another 9 years, and it would eventually go all over the world. This would be a worldwide conflict, as much as the empires could go. And so most of the fighting would be in this area here that was still the Holy Roman Empire, or the Empire, or sometimes it would be called Empire, the Imperial Forces. But France, Spain, the Ottomans were always on the periphery. Poland was a major player in this. Poland used to be a massive country. Russia was considered backwards and out of, and no one even thought about them. But these places had colonies in the New World. So there's going to be fighting there. There's going to be fighting on the coast of Africa. There's going to be fighting in India. Huge fighting in what is now Indonesia, as the Dutch begin to take those colonies from the Spanish/Portuguese. This was a horrific fight. It's hard to describe how bad the 30 Years' War was, and confusing. So, a couple of things about it. Fighting has changed dramatically. All those wars and technological changes have shifted. And so, here are harquebuses. So these are a kind of musket, but they're really top heavy. So they had, the stabilizing. They would prop that in the ground and they could fire it. They were relatively accurate to about 70 yards. Okay, when I mean relatively accurate, they could hit like a building. They were heavy, hard to produce. One of the big things they're going to do in this era is countries will begin to standardize production and make all the same kind. So they only need one size of bolt, one size of musket ball. Now, don't forget, these are all made by hand. Basically, people would make them in their homes and then sell them to the king. This is pre-industrial revolution. But more and more, they started doing combined arms because it's still really expensive to have harquebuses, or here, a lighter version, not as accurate as first, but you can fire them faster, called a musket. You've all heard of musket. And so this shows the combined arms, where they would have on the flanks and maybe strung out in front, musketeers and harquebuses, along with pikemen, with 14-foot pikes. And the thought was, well, I'll get to that in a second. So, not only this, they started standardizing artillery in the 16th century. So they started having artillery that was mobile. Instead of having, they would just drag pieces, they had it on wheels, slightly smaller, and still really difficult to move and everything else, but it would change war forever. And here shows harquebuses firing, here's musketeers firing. They still had other weapons. They would use swords, halberds. Cavalry became less armored. Armor gets in the way. So they might just have a breastplate and a helmet. And more there would be cuirassiers. who would be, they would do something called the cortège, where horsemen would ride at the enemy, fire pistols. Not very accurate, but fire, then ride off and rearm, and the next line would come in and fire. And then open it away for lancers, the long lance. They also were using dragoons, which were cavalry that carried a musket. And so they would ride to battle, get off their horses, and fight on foot. That's a dragoon. War changed dramatically. And so when they started having this, they would have these massive squares of infantry. And so you'd have the musketeers on the side protecting the flank, usually a few musketeers in front. And the goal of the musketeers was to pepper away at the enemy. And then when the enemy began to break down, men began to be hit, they got scared, then the pikemen. And these are a little bit like the old hoplites from Greece. They stick the pikes down, and march at the enemy. And these brutal battles would literally be called the push-a-pike. And the huge battles would wage between them. The problem is, I think you can see it. As muskets got better, would you want to be a guy standing there in a big box that fired muskets at you? Actually, what's going to happen is, right after this battle, actually they started doing it during this, so you had a musket. And they started putting the pike in the musket barrel. Not even good, yes, but no, what they would do is, they'd fire their musket, then put the pike in, and use your musket as a pike. And it would be soon after this war that they would get rid of the pikes completely, because they would invent something called a bayonet, which would be basically a 2-foot long pike you'd put on the edge of your musket. And so then you don't need the pike anymore.
We still use that concept, don't we?
They still have bayonets. They're almost never used in combat. So they're basically, a bayonet is now basically your knife that you can also hook on there.
Yeah.
Heck, by the Civil War, there was rarely ever.
On modern guns, they actually still put on bayonet mounts, but very rare.
Yeah, and you see them like, the big thing to use bayonets for now is, you see this in countries now like the United States, but when they want to use them to control a protest, they put bayonets on a weapon and then march at the protesters. Because nobody wants to stop it. But now they're basically knives.
Yeah.
Back then, they were like literally that long. So if your musket was about 5'5", you had 2 foot of musket, or 2 foot of bayonet, that's how meaty your nose.
Oh yeah.
But by the Civil War, they rarely ever used them. They rarely ever got close enough. So that's how combat would change. So there's 3 distinct phases of the 30 Years' War. The Bohemian Phase. Bohemia, that's Czechia, the Czech Republic, Bohemia. This is another name for it. The Bohemian Phase is the first one. This is really a religious conflict. This is religion, but it's also power. They're mostly
C-130, maybe.
Huh?
Might be a C-130. I don't know.
He's a little bit small for that.
Yeah, it was too quiet.
So this guy in Europe owns a P-51, and I heard it's going to be here today.
Yeah, this P-51 is awesome. I gotta see it personally. I gotta sit in it.
My wife's stepfather, his birthday present this year was he's gonna take him in a flight.
There's normally a fireworks show down right below the pass. You know that huge pond that's below the pass?
Yeah.
There was normally one there, and one year he had the P-51 fly right under it after it was done.
That would be cool.
That was sweet to see.
Yeah, it's a World War II fighter plane, and I have a weakness for
I'm
it.
a sucker for planes.
Huh?
I'm a sucker for planes.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Planes are awesome. So, a man by the name of Ferdinand II, he was a Habsburg Austrian. So remember we have the Habsburgs in Spain? More and more Habsburgs are going to be Austrian. That's why I put that on the map. By the way, Austria is going to be this massive empire. Now Austria is a relatively small country. Filled with Austrians. By the way, shout out Austrians. These are most of the people, their vernacular is German, so Austrians are German speakers to this day. And Ferdinand, he inherited the throne of Bohemia. And the previous monarch was an uncle, he was Catholic, or I'm sorry, he was Lutheran. Ferdinand's Catholic. And to say the Bohemians hate him is an understatement. Ferdinand tried to force them to get rid of Lutheran institutions, reestablish the Catholic Church, the whole Catholic thing. And this is really a power thing. Well, what happened was this. Oh, I already mentioned, okay, refused to tolerate the Protestants. And we're coming on something called the Defenestration of Prague. May 1618. So Ferdinand sent some representatives to Prague. Don't worry about Bohemia yet. I got to finish this. I should have had this in a while. Ferdinand sent representatives, Catholic representatives, to force Bohemia to give up their Lutheran ways. Not only did they not listen to him, to these people, they bodily picked up 2 of them and threw them out the window. And that's what defenestration means. Defenestration means literally to throw somebody out the window. So if you want to defenestrate somebody, you throw them out of a window. Now, actually, it was 3 stories up, and they just missed an iron gate that would have impaled them, and they both survived. Now, of course, the Catholics said it was angels came and guided them to the bottom. Protestants said they landed in a pile of manure. Who knows, right? But Bohemia elected a new king, Frederick II. And he was Protestant, and Ferdinand was going to get rid of him, and that's the war. And that, then we'll finish the war tomorrow. Sound like a good place? The fighting really does fascinate me. Here, it's so confusing, but you could see, like, everything that's going to come out of this. You could argue, like, this is, the Renaissance, and in the Middle Ages, you can see this, like, at the hinge moment, like, all right, that old's gone now after the 30 Years' War. And it's more modern Europe. And on that happy note, who wants a map? Or do you want me to wait until tomorrow when it's due? By the way, do you think it was manure or?
My best guess would be manure.
You're probably right. But you know what? If you're going to survive, who cares what you land on? I would be.
I got it.
No. This is better. You got it. Don't tell me. And we'll do a couple more minutes and then work on people later projects. And then tomorrow, most of the day, we'll all let you work because I told Zoe and Aaron we're going to do it now. That's a good idea. If you
Do what?
let me think about that. With the old pandemic, it's hard to do movies, even though the number of cases are going down. But that new wave is going up. The new variant, the 2 new variants, we'll see. NK94 mask.
I don't know if it's on
Huh?
I don't know if it's on
How does it go into 2 masks?
Honestly, barely depends on one.
I tried it a little bit and it's just, I couldn't talk. That's why I got that's supposed to be the high quality one. If we go to full, I'm not trying it too, especially with that new variant. And the bad part with the new variant is people who already had it. Oh,
It's not for me.
I know, it's garbage. It's not fair. You need it just attaches to sepsis. So you don't need as big of a load. We'll see.
Has a new strain been confirmed here?
Oh yeah, it's here.
Well, I don't know how it got here so bad. It's fine.
Let's just hope. Good boy. And we start going full, everyone in school class together. I mean, if everyone was a mask, keep windows open, we have the air purifiers. it'll help, but it's not so much. It's just that we get it and spread it out to all the people, all of us people. So, all right then, so tomorrow I'll see you.